as an approximation. All right, I think we're close to being live. So Terry, go ahead and give us the get-go.
All right, good morning. It's good to see everybody this morning and looking forward to our discussion today. We're very excited about it. We have joining us today Eric Wallace. For those who don't know, Eric Wallace is the founder of really now, I guess we'd call it DT Media Group, and under that larger umbrella, there's a couple of other entities. The one that we're most familiar with would be CongreGATE, that is what I believe, and I think Phil believes, is probably the most effective kind of universal platform for churches today, at least among our brethren, that fits all their needs. Eric may be most well known for his development of Song Leader Revolution years ago. No, CongreGATE is a terrific product. And we want to talk about websites today. We want to talk about CongreGATE. I know that every church I've worked with in the last, I think, 15 years has used CongreGATE. I know when Phil was looking to move, that became actually a resume piece that they wanted him to have CongreGATE on his resume, or the ability to use that. And so it plays an important role kind of in our discussion. So, Eric, let's get started a little bit. Welcome to the broadcast today, and love for you to kind of just maybe introduce CongreGATE and the background of it, and who you are, so people kind of get to a grasp of that history a little bit.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I've been doing web development, media production and stuff since I was a kid. I continue to do that today, and CongreGATE really came out of the need when I was in high school and college, just doing regular website development. A lot of churches would come asking for church websites, and a lot of those we kind of joked about on the pre-call about it always had a certain look. It always had certain things that were kind of dated now, but they knew they all wanted basically the same kind of thing on there, and it was what was in style at the time. We kind of joked it was the animated GIFs and the music playing in the background and all that kind of stuff that is almost horrendous to think about that used to be normal now. But that was what people wanted back then. And just the more and more churches that would come looking for the same kind of thing, it just kind of got my wheels spinning about, instead of doing these one-off custom sites for each one of these churches, why can't we build something that's kind of catering to the bulk of them there? And then that was becoming about the time frame when text messaging and some of these other communication methods were being more popular, and more thinking outside the box of thinking, why aren't we taking advantage of some of these things, or just the fact that websites can do a lot more than just display a page at that time. So a lot of those wheels were spinning and thinking about that, and I probably sat on that for a few years, thinking about some ideas that could happen. And then in about 2008, really started grinding on that and coming up with a game plan and stuff like that. And then in about 2009, we kind of launched CongreGATE, and it started with basically the front end website and some member features and stuff. And since then, it's progressed into a much larger platform that we kind of say is a threefold platform. It's a public website system for the generic public. It's a member connectivity platform for members to stay in touch and to have features among each other. And then it's really a leadership toolbox for leaders and elders and people who really want to manage those members with some tools that you wouldn't regularly see on a quote website. It would be more like it's its own platform for those kind of features. And that's kind of how it's developed and where it is today.
Yeah, it's really interesting that a lot of people don't understand or know about what I call the back end, which is a lot of the leadership tools, which is actually an administrative, it's a whole other section that you don't normally see, and just how powerful that is from a lot of different aspects, whether it's tracking visitors through a database or your directory function. When we made this change, and I guess I made the change about, I guess it was 2009 when I was in Memphis. For instance, our directory, we were keeping two directories. We had an online directory, which was one database. Then we had a pictorial directory, which was a completely separate database. And it was pretty interesting from that standpoint to see all the work that went into keeping these two directories up. And when we switched to CongreGATE, initially we did that for a while, but then after about 6 months, it was, wow, this is really dumb to do this much work, because we were doing double the work. So what we did, and I think what most churches have done, is we abandoned that completely, the paper directory, and we had just online but we could print the online directory off with pictures for anybody who didn't have internet access. They asked, and we'd print out, and it started off with 50. I think by the time I left, it was down to less than 30, which is a whole lot less cost. It's a really powerful tool, and that's just one area of so many areas on your platform that really help make the work easier from an online presence standpoint, and in ways people don't ever imagine or understand.
That's one of the biggest, that example is a prime example of how all these modules, and I call them modules, came about, like the directory or the public duty roster and things like that. We were looking at things that people were doing and how long it was taking, how much effort it was taking, how it involved multiple people to pull it off, just the time investment. And then, like what you said, you've got a version for this, you've got a version for that. You're keeping 4 different versions of the same kind of information. And we're like, we can figure out ways to consolidate this. And just the easiest way to do that was just happen to be through a web interface, because you can access it anywhere and anybody can manage it that way. So a lot of these modules and a lot of those things came from that exact kind of scenario where we just saw there's almost an over effort in some things that we can really simplify and consolidate. And we just kind of found that in lots of different areas and then kind of bundled them all together.
Yeah. And
for each
Phil.
side, one of the things that happens with a new family, they come in, new members, if they've got a smart device, a smartphone, we'll sit down, maybe even have one of the other members, a younger member in particular, and just sit down and say, we're going to put everyone's contact information in your phone, so that they'll all be there, and we'll be able to pull it in very quickly, with the photos, with all the phone numbers, with all the email addresses, right into their devices, and then boom, they're connected in a way that could not happen 10 years ago. Because 10 years ago, most congregations were still living on a paper directory. And so each of these little increments are learning points to help the congregations be better integrated with one another and better connected with one another. But it's all the stuff you don't see. You don't see that when you land on a church's webpage. You see maybe a couple contact details, a couple sermons, et cetera. We'll talk about that later. But learning more about CongreGATE and all these CMS systems, and there's a couple other entities that kind of narrow into church congregational back ends. But I'll say this, none of them are at CongreGATE's price point. Most of them are exceptionally higher in the dollar value range, and you may not necessarily get more for that increased price.
And sometimes they charge more based on how many members you have, so you actually get penalized by growing the church. You have to pay more, and we don't price that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things I've always appreciated about the pricing with Phillip is he's been very open, at least in our discussions before, about, hey, if this was really a price problem for a church, I know there's times they've tried to work with smaller groups to be able to help them out. And be quite honest, Eric has kind of run this as a business, but he's also tried to glorify God through it. And I think he's to be commended by that and how he's tried to assist in a way. Unlike some of these other platforms, Eric's a brother in Christ, which I think takes this to another level. And I'm not saying that to guilt trip anybody, but Eric's purpose here is in line with what our purpose is, which is to grow the kingdom. And he's done a lot of things to make our jobs easier. You know, I think about the duty roster is another one of those that's just a terrific interface. I mean, I can go in when I'm out of town and put that I'm going to be out of town a month or two ahead of time, and it's not going to schedule me. And the old guy that was in the room 5 years ago with a sheet of paper and a database of who would do what, he never knew that. And now that doesn't mean everybody uses that effectively, but if they do, it's a highly efficient process. And there was always the complaint of the deacon that did the duty roster. The same person seems to be leading singing the same week of every month. And, you know, there's some algorithms and all that programmed into the duty roster function of CongreGATE. I mean, you can manually do as much as you want for those who've not used it. But if you would like, you can just put everybody's preferences in there and what they're allowed to do, which is another cool function. And you hit to go ahead and schedule, and it would schedule literally your whole duty roster for you if that's what you wanted to do. Which is just like I said, it's extremely efficient and takes a lot less time than what we used to have to do, which frees us up to do other things, which I think is important as well. But and things for God in that sense.
My uncle used to do that duty roster, and that's
So,
where that
oh,
came
go
from.
ahead.
It took him forever to do that, and it was just one of those things you're watching. Like, there's ways to simplify this, and then even like we said, you don't know who's going to be out of town. You don't know if they're actually going to be there to do it. And then that was, like I mentioned, when text messaging was becoming more popularized. It's like, well, why don't we have this remind people? Because the second problem is you spend all that time to do it, and then those people aren't there, and then it's all for naught, and you got to find replacements and stuff. So it just came from witnessing that and seeing there's got to be some ways we can improve that process, and that one I think definitely is a big time saver if it's utilized, to its fullest potential.
And let me say this quick, Phil, before you. One of the things about the directory and that I really love too is you can send out a remind through the CongreGATE whenever you want to. We used to do it about every 6 months. That reminds everybody to go into their account and update their directory information and update their preferences, which again is highly efficient compared to, remember, we used to have to pass out papers once a year to confirm everybody's address, to confirm everybody's what they would be willing to do. And so many of those things are just so much more efficient through this platform.
Yeah, and I'll just add one more thing to it. Setting up the text announcement of your responsibilities, that it will text them the day before the month starts or the day before their service opportunity comes up, is really like one of the biggest surprises for some of the folks at our congregation and other places. I got a text message that told me to be ready for the Lord's Supper. That told me to be ready to lead the closing prayer. That may not seem like a big deal, but it is when it comes down to the bottom line of people prepared to worship well. And that's all part of the back end of this stuff. I know this happens to me. I know it happens to Terry too. Sometimes we don't know how to do a thing with CongreGATE. And so my method, free announcement, is to do one of two things. I either text Terry and ask him, have you solved this problem before? Like, here's my thing I want to do. Where did you go do that? Sometimes I've messaged Eric. Eric's response is always the same. Terry, what's Eric's response? Where does he tell us to go to find our answers?
Go to support and find the video tutorials, and it will tell you how to do that.
Yeah. So Eric, take a few minutes and just describe what's in those tutorials. Why do you keep sending us back to the same resource? Because it's not a bad thing. You can't answer all of our questions. You shouldn't have to, especially if you've already asked it once before. So what's going on in those video resources that maybe someone who's wanting to get more skill in using it will find? And where would they go first? Like, what's the first stopping point for your most common question as a second kind of connector to it?
Yeah. Well, first of all, when you sign up with the service, we give you, it's a quick start guide, and it's also on the support section there. And that basically goes through the rundown of, here's the order we'd recommend you set some things up. Here's how to do some of the basic functionalities and things like that. Because the platform is so diverse and it has so many different modules, and it can be cumbersome if you're trying to set up all this at one time. And the beauty of that is that's why we like to recommend that you let different members manage different parts of the site if possible, so that you're not taking all that on yourself. But if you go into each module, we do have a video for every module on the system, and that does cover, here's what it does, here's every setting for that module, here's what happens when you do that. And since it's video, you can watch it being set up and demonstrated on there. We always typically will tell people go there first, because that'll give you the background knowledge of what it can do, how it works, and things like that. Now, if there's specific questions of something like, I know it's built for this. Here's our situation. We want to see, can we modify it, or is there a workaround to pull this off, or some kind of way to, maybe use something that it wasn't initially intended to. We're more than happy to try to help meet those needs and figure those situations out. And if there's just specific questions in general about anything on the platform, all of our plans include technical support, and you can email us or contact us with a support ticket of any questions or specific concerns. But typically at first, we do say watch the videos, just because that's kind of the big overview of everything, because you could just sit there with a litany of questions, because it can do so much that lots of those questions are answered in those videos initially. But it's not a cop-out not to help. It's certainly just kind of get the background on there first. Then get us more specific with questions. We're more than happy to help with that.
Yeah, and in those videos, if I remember correctly, because I've not had to use them in a while, which has been nice, there's different times for different issues, so you can fast forward through the videos to the part you need to see. So if you pull up the video and it's like a 30-minute video, you may only need 5 minutes of that. Just look in the comment section, and it will tell you like 2 minutes and 12 seconds is where this begins, and you just go over with your mouse to that point and watch just that section. So I don't want anybody to be intimidated by that, because I've done that a lot, figuring some of those things out, and it takes a lot less time if you just kind of look in the comments and see where to go.
Yeah, we don't want to watch somebody to force them to watch an hour-long video of hearing how this works. I understand that totally.
Yeah.
So let's kind of, Terry, you got something?
No, go ahead.
So let's kind of expand it a little bit, because we're talking about what CongreGATE can do. There's some basic things that CongreGATE can accomplish. And, I've had websites around since 1996 that I've coded myself. Some of it I did by hand with HTML. Then I moved into doing SourceForge stuff, MamboForge. It's a server CMS system. And then shifted to, I still do this little WordPress level stuff, but I don't want to put the time in that I used to. So CongreGATE can quickly and easily do some things that everyone likes to do, which is number one, put sermon audio in accessible formats that you can then shift into podcasts, etc. And Eric, you can talk about these in a second. Secondly, it can do content management of material, like written material, articles, bulletin type stuff, and some other things as well. Structural announcements and schedules of assemblies and things like that. Talk a little bit about first the CMS side. Okay, I'll just stop using technical terms. Putting a sermon on the internet. What goes on with all of that?
Yeah, one of the things when we developed this was the issue of if a church had a website, it normally was because somebody knew how to build one and somebody knew how to program it. That made them the go-to to do all of those things. No one else had an opportunity to do that because the average person doesn't know how to do that. You fast forward a few years later, they've built these content management systems, or CMS, as you're using that abbreviation there, and that kind of opened the door where the more generic person can do it, because it's not necessarily being programmed at this point. Now it's kind of a drag and drop interface or a user interface, something to that degree. And that's what we've done with CongreGATE. We're not piggybacking off of another pre-built CMS or pre-built system. We've developed our own from scratch, and I think that's what makes it a little bit different. Is we've taken and thought about the quote average church member or average person in mind when trying to make these kind of updates. So, for example, putting a sermon on the website is as easy as you're going to click the button, add a new sermon. It's going to say, where's the file? Click the file, find it on your computer. While it's uploading, it's going to ask you, what's the title of the sermon? What's the date? What's the speaker? What's the series? What's the description? If you got a video link, etc., you just fill out that form and click save, and it's done. It automatically goes on the website. If you have it configured properly, it automatically shows up on the homepage. It shows up on your podcasts. There's really nothing else you have to do after that at all. There's no plugins. There's no special things to configure. It's that simple, really, for sermons.
Yeah. Extremely easy. Extremely easy.
Yeah. Again, like with all of this, the work goes in on the setup side. And we're going to talk about Google Analytics in a second. That's a little bit more challenging level of technical acumen to kind of get it going. But on the podcast side, once you figure out how to code an RSS feed, and I know that sounds intimidating, it's really not. It's just copying a link and clicking it into a box and telling it it's here. Then it does it all. It takes the information you give about the content, it brings it in. It sends it right up to the aggregation systems, which all podcast applications are basically just like window sales. It just says, here, this thing exists. It now is available on your device or in your car or on your computer. And it will share that like a seed spreader to anyone who wants to hook up to the trough. So doing those steps, and we might talk about that in a second if we want to, is really the hard part. After that's done, just about anybody is trainable to do the upload side, especially if you can do it at the building and do it in-house, unless you want to do some other stuff elsewhere. So one of the things that Robert talked about that Terry's already mentioned, we got a couple of questions we're going to hit on. Robert talked about the cost for small congregations, and the point that I already responded in text, but we'll mention it here. Always contact Congregate DP Media directly about those details. There might be solutions that will get you in the door far cheaper than you think. It's not expensive. I'm not going to quote the prices because I can't remember, but I'll tell you this. If you're paying to advertise in the phone book or in a print media item and not maintaining a Congregate or equivalent website, your money's in the wrong box, just on a practical level.
Let me follow that up.
I would include that
Phil.
even bigger.
Yeah, let me follow that up. Robert, you need to get a couple of copies of a book called Becoming a Welcoming Church by Tom Rainer and share it with some of your members. And if you'd like, send me a PM. I have a couple of copies I can ship you that are extra. It'll talk about some of these things, but you gotta understand, Rainer's group is the one that said that your website is the front door to your church. And I gotta tell you, there's nothing more frustrating than when I travel. My daughter plays soccer, and about one weekend a season, I'll take off to go. It is so frustrating when I find churches in the area that don't have a website. So I don't know a lot of information about them. They are failing on a lot of levels. If you don't have a web presence, it is a really, really bad thing in our society today. Our congregation right now has a new sign. We don't have the name. We don't have the times of our services posted. We have our website because that's where you find that information in our culture today. And I think it's important for people to understand kind of that, just how important that is, and how important your web presence is. And if you're with a smaller group, you are not going to need probably a lot of the features initially, at least, that a group like where I'm at may be using. And there are different packages within CongreGATE as well. Eric, you can kind of talk about that as well, but there's different levels of membership as far as that goes.
And I think maybe a misconception is that we do have different price points, and I'm fine to talk about the pricing. Our lowest price point for our economy plan is only $20 a month. And we feel that's very affordable for a congregation of almost
that is
any size.
Incredibly cheap.
Yes, very affordable. And they go all the way up to only $55 a month. And the only additions on our packages that you can do a la carte that we say is if you want to add specifically text messaging and voice messaging, because those are additional costs outside of that. But even for those plans that range between the $20 and $55 a month, every single feature that we've talked about and that you see on our website advertised is included in that. It is not that you pay a certain price to gain some features and another price that doesn't have those features. You can take advantage of any of the modules, the directory, the sermons, the bulletins, all of those things are included. The differences in the levels of packages with us is the amount of storage, how much content you want to put on there, and what kind of technical support options you want. Those are the biggest differentiating factors. So really, we've tried to price this where the size of the congregation doesn't matter, and you're not being penalized or being put in a box to say, well, there is a $20 plan, but we can only put 6 months worth of sermons on there before we're going to have to upgrade. We would never want to do something like that. So even at the very lowest level, I think a congregation of nearly any size can afford $20 a month. And we give you enough storage on there, you can put years and years worth of material on there before you'd ever even have to consider possibly moving up in a plan if you even wanted to do that. So hopefully that kind of addresses some of those, maybe some misconceptions of what's included, what's not. You get all of it. It's just how much you're going to use and store and things like that.
Yeah, and for $240 a year, you can't put 2 ads in a newspaper. I mean, you really need to think about that. And most of those places that don't see a need for a website probably are still advertising in the choose the church of your choice page because they think that's important. It's a generational problem, and it's one that's really about education. But in comparison to other things, and quite frankly, I would say this to any preacher out there, it is likely that in most cases, not all, I understand that, but in most cases, you could find the $20 a month to pay for the CongreGATE if you had to. And that's not being ugly, but I pay for several subscription services myself. Adobe, Microsoft. There's a lot of costs I incur. By the way, that would be a tax write-off, just to think about it in that way as well. So I think for $20 a month, it's a tremendous bargain. You can't host your own site for that much, really. So it's an amazing value for what you get in return.
Right. I've got a question to bring up in a second. Here's a suggestion, while I would rather the economic cost for Congregate be the congregation's cost, I understand an evangelist wanting it enough to do this. Go to the congregation and say, I'm going to pay for the first year. After the first year, let's talk. And then they'll see what is accomplished through it. And I guarantee you the value will be visible if you do a good job and you do some good background looking at things. Paul Hammond has a question. Hammonds has a question for us. It's a little technical, but I'm going to read it verbatim, and then we can digest it, and we can go forward. He says, I don't use CongreGATE so much, but can you talk a little bit about the importance of responsive design for mobile use and also the importance of setting up a DSL? I see this a lot with sites that are unsecure because they don't actually do transactions and don't think they need it. But not having it can cause issues with Google rankings as well as throwing up red flags if you use browser security like Norton. It makes for some pretty bad user experiences online. And so let's strip off some of the technical terms quickly and just kind of get to the heart of the matter. So Eric, CongreGATE, I know, seamlessly adapts to every browser environment already. But can you kind of share exactly what Paul is getting at so those that may not be as technically talented can kind of have a little bit better picture?
Sure. The term responsive design I think, was what he used. And that's the term that means when you're on a website on a desktop computer, for example, on your laptop or something, and then you switch to your iPad and then you switch to your phone, that the site expands and constrains itself so that it looks like it's been properly formatted for each of those devices. Back in the day, what would happen is you'd have a desktop site and it would just shrink itself down. It would be very hard to read and you'd have to pinch and zoom. You probably remember doing that on your phone or iPad and things like that. All of our sites are completely responsive, so they'll format perfectly on a desktop, laptop, tablet, and a mobile phone. Landscape, portrait, all of that is built into there on there. So there's no work you have to do. There's nothing you literally do anything. It's just built in, so you don't even have to do anything with it. That's pretty much the easy answer on that one.
And then the other aspect of this is this: if you're not going to use CongreGATE, definitely make sure that you test your website on a variety of devices. You will see the struggles that can exist if you go off to a different browser. While a large component of the internet lives in maybe 3 different browsers, there's a lot of device-centric viewing environments that can all of this look weird. And so often you're giving yourself additional problems. Because you won't have the appropriate digital signature coming out and saying, this is a safe site. It's not full of gremlins. I use those very generic terms that are going to try to capture your cookie information and do some unknown level of economic transactions based on what they've learned about your internet behavior. And so CongreGATE kind of streamlines all of that back off of the table.
And the second part to his question, I think initially was about the SSL security. And what that's referencing is the little lock icon you see in your address bar, or sometimes it'll light up green and it'll tell you this site has been secure, it's safe. It's what you see when you go to your bank website or your credit card website or something like that. And of course, on a church website, we're not doing financial transactions or anything like that. But as his point is well made, what's starting to happen is Google and other search engines are seeing that gives you more validity to sites when they are secured like that, even though there might not be anything that is passing back and forth that needs that level of security, but it's there. And all of our sites are SSL secured, so that's built in. You don't have to buy your own certificate. That's all included in our monthly fees. That's built in. You don't have to activate that. You launch the site and it's already secure for you, so you're not going to have to worry about anything like that. And I think when you pair those two things together, you find that what happens a lot of times is when you've got somebody who's built maybe even a very robust church website, and they've programmed that by hand or done something custom, it's not going to be responsive because that wasn't a thing a few years ago, and that's more programming that has to be done specifically for that, unless you're building it in some kind of platform already. But a lot of what we've seen in these custom-built church sites, they're not going to be responsive, and that's one problem. And then secondarily, they're not going to be SSL secured. You're going to be paying every year for an SSL certificate and then a hosting provider that's going to integrate that for you. So those two things go away completely, and you don't have to worry about them with CongreGATE.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit about, because he mentioned Google and all of that. Let's talk about kind of some things in that area, Eric. I know one of the things that's really important is the Google Analytics piece. And that, quite frankly, just allows you to go in and see if you're being effective or not, and how to track kind of how your page is being followed. But also another part of that is, I think some people don't understand is, you need to go in and see and like type in your church's name, or maybe just Church of Christ in your town, and see where you come up on the Google search, and explain to them. I think some people don't realize that's really our job on our end as the users, to develop content, and maybe to go in. This is a little separate from DT Media and even CongreGATE, but explain what Google's really looking for as far as that goes in their search functions. And I know that changes, but maybe just some general principles for people to understand.
Yeah. But the first thing you mentioned was Google Analytics, and Google Analytics is like the old school web counter. You've probably seen those, looks like a speedometer on the old cars, that would flick. Everybody's seen that in the late 90s and the early 2000s on websites and stuff. That's all Google Analytics is, except it takes it to another level. Not only do you see what pages they're looking at and have counts on each page, you're being able to see they clicked here, then they went here, then they did this, and they came from this state, and they came from this country. All that information Google provides to you. So you can integrate a free Google Analytics account and see what people are doing on the website very easily. Now, in terms of what Google's looking for on the website, a lot of questions we get, even outside of church stuff, is I need my website to be #1 on Google. Well, no one can force that to happen. That's an organic thing with the algorithms Google has and things like that. CongreGATE in any website we would build is going to be search engine optimized, so it's prepared for Google to index it and to see everything. But really what it comes down to is, what is it looking at? What content is on there? If you don't put any kind of content that people are looking for on there, you can only do so much. And I think that's what you alluded to. That's the end user's responsibility, or the church's responsibility. If you're always putting a sermon up every week, okay, new content's coming up. If you're putting articles that has, actual verbiage and text on the website of maybe some hot topics or pop culture terms or something that people might be looking for, that's going to help. Continually putting that information and keeping it fresh on the site is going to go a long way. And then linking your site to other sites and vice versa, having sites link back to you, that's also going to bring up your validity. And I would recommend, if you don't already have, your church needs to be on Google Maps. It needs to be listed as a Google, it's not a business, but on Google Business. It needs to know that there's a physical location for this. There's a website associated with it. There's an address associated with it. And all that is going to help bolster and boost your appearance on the search engines.
Yeah, and I know new content, and by the way, when you put new content, there's a tagging function. Tagging is important. I think some people just kind of pass right by that and don't realize. And look, nobody really sees those tags. You can put 150 tags up there. You want them to be along with what you're putting in there. But the more you tag and the more live content drives your website up in the algorithm of Google. And so all of that stuff has a tremendous importance.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Here's a couple caveats to that. Recognize this. If you're using Google search, it will be personalized to you. And so if you really want to get raw results, you've got to clear your browser history, log out of your personalized account, and search it rough in the raw. Because it's in, like, if I search Eastside Church of Christ, there's the top 4 results are the Eastside Church in Bowling Green, Kentucky, and then the next 3 ones reference the Eastside Church here in Sharpsburg, Georgia. But that's personalized because of my browser history and what I've been doing recently. And so I know that I was just at the Eastside Church, mightyisthelord.com recently. So it's going to pop to the top. It's going to pull of the list. The other 2 listings are the Google listing and the Facebook page for the church here at Eastside in Sharpsburg. Those are all important things. But they also, the key background to it hasn't really changed much on the internet. Fresh content. That means you're constantly posting the most recent things. And if it is just, and this is not a bad thing, the sermons and Bible classes from Sunday, that's like really the core. You have to do it if you want your website to be alive. If you don't feed the website dies.
You think
You
if you go
know,
to a website that you visited for a church and the last sermon updated on there was from 7 months ago, are you going to believe that their worship times are accurate? Are you going to believe that they still meet at this? I mean, everything becomes into question when like that. And that was one of the things we need to make this where the content is so easy to keep updated that it gets updated. Because the minute it gets outdated, it's almost better not to have a website, because then you question everything and you just don't know what's even accurate anymore, because clearly no one's paying attention to it.
Correct.
right. And let me navigate to, because time is always of an essence, though two preachers and a guest make it really hard. Um, what should be, this is a group question, what should be on the homepage? Like, what are the things that need to be out there based on your experience, based on what you've looked at? What should we have on the landing page? What should be there?
I can answer quickly the things that we've built in that automatically give you dynamic content on the website, because I think that's important. So we have modules, and we call them widgets, on the homepage that will automatically put the most recent sermons you upload automatically on there. Same thing with news posts or announcements. Same things with articles or bulletins, if some people use them for that purpose. The calendar, what if you put your worship assemblies on there? Great. If you put gospel meetings on there, great. Anything that's coming up in the next few events can be automatically populated on there. And then we have modules and widgets that are completely freeform. You can put your own content. You can put Facebook. You can put Google Maps. You can put whatever you want to. So our goal is to make it where, without you having to do anything at all other than the normal day-to-day operations of the website, like adding a calendar event or uploading a sermon, your homepage will be new every time. After that, you can customize and tailor that to what you want to advertise or what you want to put on there specifically. And maybe you guys have more comments on what you've seen and maybe what works for maybe trying to get people to appeal to people who haven't been to the church before. Welcome videos are a nice feature sometimes, but maybe it's just a gospel meeting you want to advertise and you make a custom graphic or something for that. You can kind of tailor that, but we provide you at least with the built-in tools where there can always be something new and fresh on there without you having to go in and actually do anything.
Yeah, I'll say that first off, your homepage needs to look clean, and I think that's one of the things. I remember when I talked to Eric years ago. That was back when, and one of my complaints at that time, and Eric may remember this phone call, was how I could pull up a website and know it was CongreGATE from the very beginning, because they all had the same homepage back then. Now, back then, by the way, to get a different homepage, they offered custom design for the front homepage. You could pay for your own design. But I know that they have since then, there's different homepage designs. And so you need to pick whatever is best fitting for you, but it needs to be clean, it needs to be appealing. But my number one pet peeve, and on ours, if you were to go look at Chelsea Church of Christ website, we have a big welcome video that really talks about our heart of discipleship. But across the top, there's a ribbon now that we've added in the last probably 3 months that says exactly when we meet, and it kind of pops off the page. What I really despise about church websites is that the majority of them, for some reason, have their meeting times on a subpage, and sometimes it doesn't even say meeting times. Sometimes it says, it's on the page that says contact us, or sometimes it's on the page at the very bottom that says about us. But it's very hard to find out when churches meet. You need to have the most important information on your homepage is what time you meet and your address for where you meet. That's the second pet peeve, is sometimes you got to go to a subpage to find out where the building's located. That all of that is extra work that should not be done. That doesn't help the person who happens to be in town looking for a church to attend at 8:45 and it's 9 o'clock and they can't find you because you're not on Google Maps. So times of services and location are two huge things that have to be on your homepage.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's like a gimme thing that you need to know when you meet, where you meet, and then it's going to have fresh, relevant content showing up into it. Those are really like the most important get-goes, and they can be done any number of ways. One thing I do regularly, at the beginning of actually at the end of the month for the next month upcoming, for those who use CongreGATE, I will put in placeholder spots for each of the upcoming audio recordings. So all of the sermons get a placeholder, all of the Bible classes get a placeholder, in part so on Sunday morning, even before the stuff has been recorded, they're going to be showing up on the website in the recent lesson category. And then when I go in and do the work to bring the audio in for it, then boom, it's already there for me. I add the file, I add the additional information, and it's there. It's just one of the steps that I do to kind of smooth that process over. And then that means there's content waiting ahead of time, as well as all the other layers of calendar specific stuff informationally. It's all there. Another thing that's important to do, like we mentioned Luke Adams a couple of times, take the time to figure out some personalization that matches the group that you're part of. Color-wise, there's people who are great at that who will give you advice. But you can stay in the core structure. All the templates, I think that's what you call them inside of CongreGATE, right? Are they called templates there?
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember. They're already pre-themed, and they're done in a way to have complements and contrasts in the colors. There's nothing wrong with using those. Just make sure you give it the content to be full. Start feeding it that food of regular sermons, regular audio stuff. I know that for audio, it's really easy to upload your file. However you got it recorded, whether you recorded it on a phone, some sort of digital device, maybe you did it at a higher level of technology, whatever. What are some best practices if you're going to stream video through the portal of your website, or you're going to host videos through third-party sites? Like from what you've seen, Eric, I know Terry and I have talked about this. I think that's an important question because it's happening more and more. Eric, what's going on with CongreGATE in that area?
Yeah, that is becoming more and more commonplace, and we're certainly not shy about saying we are not a video streaming provider. So that's not something that we do for you and that we offer as a service, or that we plan to even get into that business. But what we want to make sure is that you can directly integrate those services that do provide that. So YouTube, Vimeo, there's even specific live streaming providers that are specifically for churches. All of those providers normally will give you some kind of either a direct link to the video, and you can directly put that on one of maybe your member pages if you want to privatize that. If you want to make that public, you could put that directly on one of the public pages. Or they'll give you the actual, what we call embed code, which will be some HTML that they'll give you. You can copy and paste it and put it in any of the web pages on your CongreGATE site, and the video will actually show right there. They don't have to go to a separate website. They don't have to leave your CongreGATE site. It will appear right in there. And those providers give you that code. So there's a lot of options to integrate, but the beauty of it is we don't do it, but we don't limit who you can use either, because we allow you to integrate it with links or with the embed code. So as long as you've got one of those two things, you can be free to choose and pick whatever provider that meets your needs the best and still integrate that directly or even indirectly with just a link off of the site. But pretty much it will look like it's still cohesive. It's not going to be you're going to 4 different pages to get off from your CongreGATE site to the live stream. We want to make it really easy for people to go from one to the other.
Yeah, Robert Ogden asked about that. He said, is there a way to integrate Facebook Live video with a CongreGATE website? And I think that's probably here's the challenge. Facebook Live is the most effective, probably live streaming, but it's also the worst way to integrate to an offsite. And so, Robert, you'd be better off to use like a streaming site like Vimeo that will then distribute that stream to both your Facebook and to your CongreGATE. We're getting into this, and one of the problems you get into is if you're live streaming to, let's say, 2 locations. Let's say we want to YouTube Live and Facebook Live at the same time, then you're splitting your upload speed in half. And that's really key in all this. And I know it's getting a little technical, but the majority of churches, you want to really increase your cost, you look at increasing your upload speed. That's where internet service providers really get you, is on the upload speed. So it's better, what we're finding out in our research is it's better to find a third party, kind of one source to live stream to, and then, split them from that platform off to your other platforms.
Right. And this could be another conversation. We can get in some experts on this, but you're talking about Mevo, you're talking about Blackmagic. Those are the big players on two edges of this process. And I
Hmm.
don't intend to get all the technical stuff there. I mean, that's really amazing stuff that you can do. But really, yeah, you don't want to use Facebook directly from a church's website. And that's just like a black hole of data. It just
Yeah.
won't work the way you want. So the best practice is to find a way to skip over that barrier of upload walls that kind of take place. And there's some great things to do about that. So Robert probably wouldn't encourage doing that. I would encourage maybe some different ways to get it to the website. And really, a better maneuver, and this is from my perspective, is if people land on the website, send them to your Facebook page. And that's probably going to be a more dollar efficient and efficient outcome in the long term, is to get them there and have them watch it in Facebook. So, you know, there goes black magic complaints. That's all the voodoo. But that's kind of like a step there. Another question that was asked is audio on the website or hosted in a third-party setting? I'll give my answer to that. Eric can have his. I'll tell you cost-wise, generally speaking, your cost value is if you already use CongreGATE, it doesn't cost you to host it there. If you host it
Yeah.
anywhere other than a few advertised financed sites, it will cost you money. Uh, there's not a whole lot of gain there in hosting it in a third-party site. You don't gain any real aggregation. You don't gain any real reach because they're not going to advertise it for you for the most part. So your best value is hosting it right at CongreGATE. But Eric, what size files should they give you? I know that's a
And
big
we're
issue too,
specifically
but
talking about audio at this point.
audio
Yes.
at this point, yes,
Okay, audio
just
at this point.
audio.
Yeah, you definitely want to host it with us in terms of if you want to utilize built-in things like the podcast feeds and things like that, because if you put that off-site, we don't have access to that. So that's one thing you'd have to consider to utilize the built-in features and things like that. You want to host that here, and you're not penalized to do that. So there'd be no other reason unless you want to have it available in a different location to duplicate it, but I wouldn't put it off-site. We recommend for just complete compatibility across the board, you want to use an MP3 file. We know that there's MP4 and different things like that to compress a little bit more, but MP3 is still the generic for everything, especially with podcast feeds. So we always recommend that. And I think the biggest difference, and we indicate this on the new sermon upload page, a lot of people might just leave the default settings for file sizes, which is going to be most likely used for music. And spoken voice does not need to be compressed like music is at all. And you can compress those file sizes down a lot by making those changes to the settings, going from stereo to mono, going from 44.1 maybe to 32 kilohertz. There's lots of little tips and things like that, and especially compressing the bit rate for the MP3, getting it down to maybe 96 or 48 if it's mono, for example. We give you those specs on there, and if your software allows you to do that, we're confident you can get a 45-minute sermon down to between 10 to 15 megabytes in file size. And that's a good amount that people can save. They can stream easily. If you leave those music settings on there, your file sizes will be much, much larger and can put a strain when it's trying to be streamed or saved and build up people's library space quite more quickly, than if those file sizes were a fraction of what they could be.
Yeah. And so really it should be sub 10. Like getting to the 15 probably means you have artifacts in your compression and you've done something wrong. If you have issues with that, I recommend the use of a program called Audacity. I'll try to link a lot of this stuff in the comments later. Audacity is free. It works on all the platforms. It's a way you can trim, edit, compress, and contain your audio files. And in the end, you get a much better product. It'll sound better. You will not sound like Chris Emerson, but you'll be a better version of you. And so that's part of the outcome there.
And
A couple
Phil,
other things.
if you're getting the live stream, by the way, Audacity allows you to drop the video into Audacity and pull the audio off of the video. So it actually,
Right.
it's a very powerful program for what you get.
Yes.
Right. You can just open the video file, the audio or the video goes away, and you're left with the audio, and then you can trim away. And so it's a
Yeah.
real one-step shop if that's your issue. You can also download that video from your Facebook feed, from your YouTube feed to do your edits then, and you're skipping a step. You're skipping the physical recording process at the building. And now you're doing
Correct.
it in a different way, which can possibly save the money that was involved in those other processes. Now, you might want to have audio separately recorded for different reasons, et cetera, as you step up in your production quality, if you will. So a couple of things that are kind of listed in here on the questions as well. I'm just scrolling back for a second. Yeah, I think we've hit most of them. But again, if you've got specific questions we didn't cover in the broadcast, drop them in the comments too. We can always follow up with a text question and also maybe bring Eric back another time if his schedule lets us. We're already at 50 minutes for a 30-minute broadcast. So it's probably a good time to shift into making sure we hit our high marks, which we're talking about CongreGATE, talking about how you got to where it is, but also some of those best practices. I think we've hit many of those things. Terry, is there anything left on your table that you wanted us to make sure that we heard about for CongreGATE per se?
Well, we may do another broadcast about streaming and video. I'll throw this out there. We didn't even touch on this. Eric's group, DP Media, is much larger than CongreGATE, and Eric has a recording studio and some of that kind of stuff, but they do video as well. And we've used DP Media Group actually to do, and when I was in Memphis, to do a couple of videos of our congregation, and you can contact Eric about that. I mean, you have to pay for that, obviously. Eric is not donating his time, but it's a really, especially if you don't have anybody that has the ability to edit video and put together a really good video. We even had drone footage of the building and that kind of stuff, thanks to Eric. And all of that stuff he can deal with you. That's more of a custom pricing kind of thing, by the way. But I just encourage people to reach out to Eric and to discuss maybe their needs, whether it's video or whether it's CongreGATE or whatever. So Eric, just what's the best way to reach you for those platforms? Kind of give people your contact info, and maybe they're interested in CongreGATE. I think that's the best thing for us to leave with is if they're not using your services, how can they start?
Yeah, CongreGATE's website is congregateonline.com. All the pricing, all the plans, all the information is on there. You can sign up on there. You can do a free demo on there. We have a free trial period, so play with it. We've got lots of demo videos on there. You can kind of see how it works and sign up directly on there. If you're looking for things that are web development or custom development outside of CongreGATE specifically, or video production or media production and things like that, like you've mentioned, we've done a lot of church videos, welcome videos, informational videos for churches all over the country. That's at DP Media Group. D is in digital, P is in production, mediagroup.com. And you can contact us on any of those platforms. And just as a little teaser before we go, we're working on CongreGATE version 6 that'll be released later this year, and that's going to be a big update for us. So we'll have more information on that later on, but that's gonna refresh a lot of things and be a really nice upgrade coming later this year.
That means more YouTube
So
videos for me.
New tutorial videos, yes, exactly.
So will version 6 auto-generate disfellowship letters? Because that's a known issue.
Exactly. We
Wow.
joked before about all the things it can do that we probably shouldn't have it do.
That's a callback for those who were listening to our broadcast last week, which also Eric took the time, thankfully, to kind of listen to some of that as well. Here's the last things. I really think that this is a tool that requires a little bit of time investment to get the value out of, but it's not so much as it feels when you first look at it. You're more than welcome to pester Terry and I with questions. Just know that we might answer it in the same way that Eric did and say, have you seen this video? If you've got questions related to all of this stuff, as always, give us a call. Let us know. I know I got the chance to talk to some of you over the past week about related to stuff with CongreGATE as well. I'm sure Eric gets tons of questions all the time. We're happy to do that. My personal goal is to try to do the best that I can to be an effective encourager to those who want to share the gospel. CongreGATE is a tool that can really help you do that if you want it to. It won't do the work for you, but it will help you do the work. It's worth the time investment. Last parting shots for you guys. Eric, Terry, you got anything?
Thanks for talking about this. And of course, if there's any questions anybody has, shoot them over. Shoot us an email. Let us know. We'll happy to answer. And we won't direct you to a video initially.
Yeah. Yeah. Just a thanks to
That's
Eric
for
for
special
joining.
customers.
Yeah.
Only our valued customers.
I just want to thank Eric for joining us, because I know he took time out of his day for that, and we're very appreciative of that and the time he spent with us today. Sorry we kind of monopolized that for an hour, but we really enjoyed it.
No problem. Thank you.
All right, everybody, have a great day. May the Lord bless you in each of your endeavors. If we can serve you in any way, shape, or form, please let us know, and take care out there.
All right, bye-bye.